I'd never imagined that a brief beach getaway could alter everything. A wave washed away trust, leaving an unfixable gap in our marriage. The night sky was full of stars, and the sea mirrored the soft moonlight, creating a mysterious scene that was both calming and odd. The waves gently hit the shore, as if sharing the ocean's secrets. Secrets that perhaps I myself would soon become part of. The sea breeze blew, making the hem of my dress flutter and bringing a slight chill that I wasn't sure came from nature or my own heart. Caleb, the man I'd been with for over 25 years, had planned this trip. He had always loved the ocean, saying it made him feel truly free. I used to think, in the early years of our marriage, that I was the one who gave him that feeling of freedom. But over time, I gradually realized I was just a small boat in his vast sea, drifting aimlessly and perhaps no longer his desired destination. Joining us were Ryan and Jake, two of Caleb's close friends. They were adventurous men with exciting stories that made our evenings around the campfire lively. But tonight, amid the crackling fire and sparkling wine glasses under the moonlight, there was something unusual in the air. An invisible tension, an undercurrent waiting to erupt. When the fire was at its brightest, Caleb leaned back, raised his wine glass, and smiled. That smile was what made me fall in love with him. Confident, a bit mischievous, and somehow unpredictable. "Let's switch sleeping places tonight for something different," he said, his eyes sparkling with challenge. I laughed, thinking it was just a harmless joke. But as my eyes swept over Ryan and Jake's faces, a chill ran down my spine. No one objected. No one was surprised. They just looked at each other, as if they had been waiting for this moment. I looked at Caleb, searching his eyes for an explanation, but he just took a sip of his drink as if this were completely normal. The waves still hit the shore, a haunting rhythm that foreshadowed an approaching storm. Little did I know that tonight's decision would take me to the edge of temptation, where the waves would not only wash away footprints in the sand, but also the fragile boundaries between right and wrong. The cool night breeze swirled around me, but it didn't wake me up. On the contrary, it made me feel like I was drifting into a strange dream, a dream that I didn't know where it was leading me. Caleb stood up, stretching as if the offer to switch tents was a trivial matter. He patted Ryan on the shoulder, laughing. "I'll sleep in your tent tonight, Ryan." Ryan smiled, shrugging in agreement, as if this was all too familiar. Only I, still sitting there, felt something unsettling creeping into every crack of this seemingly harmless dinner. Jake, on the other side of the fire, said nothing. He just looked at me with a calm gaze, the firelight reflecting in his deep eyes. It was not the innocent gaze of a normal friend. It was the gaze of a man who had seen through my vulnerability, and perhaps I saw danger in him too. Caleb smiled excitedly, as if he were enjoying the game he had created. "Well, good night, everyone," he said casually. But I couldn't ignore the strangeness in that smile. As Caleb and Ryan walked toward their tents, Jake and I sat alone by the dying fire. The space suddenly became eerily quiet. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to fight off the cold, but perhaps I was fighting off something even scarier. "I don't mind if you find our tent too cold," Jake said, his voice warm but not forceful. He said it like it was a polite invitation, but I could sense something behind it. I pursed my lips, glancing toward Caleb's tent. From here, I could see the dim light coming from inside, the silhouettes of two men moving. Caleb didn't look back at me. I tried to reassure myself that this was just a simple situation. There was nothing wrong with sleeping in someone else's tent, right? But why did I feel like I was about to step into a dangerous situation? "I'll be fine," I said, but my voice wasn't entirely certain. Jake didn't say anything more. He just nodded, his eyes still on me as if he were assessing something. Then he stood up and walked back to his tent, leaving me alone by the fire. I sat there for a while, trying to convince myself that I wasn't wavering. But with each passing minute, each gust of cold wind, I felt myself losing control. The cold night at sea was brutal. I wrapped my jacket tightly around me, but it wasn't enough. My body shivered, and a stronger wind blew through, making me shiver more. I looked toward Jake's tent. If I just stepped inside, I would be warm. I wouldn't have to shiver anymore. But I also knew that once I did, I would never be the same person again. I took a deep breath. My mind told me to get up, walk straight to my tent and not look back. But my heart, or perhaps the loneliness that had accumulated over the years, whispered something else. I stood slowly, my feet on the soft sand. Not a sound echoed, only the distant sound of the ocean waves like a never-ending melody. I didn't dare look towards Caleb's tent. When I unzipped Jake's tent and climbed in, the warmth enveloped me immediately. Jake wasn't asleep yet. He was lying on his side facing me. But as soon as I entered, he moved away a little, leaving space between us. There was a long silence. I felt my heart pounding, my breathing becoming heavier. Jake didn't say anything, but I could feel his presence so close that if I reached out, I could touch him. "You don't have to do anything, just warm up," he said softly, but I heard something else in his voice, an expectation, an unspoken invitation. I looked at him in the dim light. I saw his face clearly, strong, calm, but with a tension that I couldn't ignore. I didn't know what would happen next, but I did know that tonight I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The silence in the tent was suffocating. The waves outside were still pounding steadily against the sand, but inside everything seemed to have stopped. I could hear my heart pounding, each beat like a drumbeat in my mind, reminding me that I was facing a decision that could change everything. Jake was only a small distance away, but I could feel his warmth. A different kind of warmth than the campfire outside, different from the blanket I wrapped myself in on cold nights. This warmth carried life, a strong presence that I couldn't ignore. He didn't look at me, but I knew he was aware of my presence right next to him. I pulled the blanket over me, trying to steady my breathing. Just a touch, and everything could spiral out of control. If I moved just a little closer, I would break every boundary I had maintained for over 25 years. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my head of the crazy thoughts. But in the silence, I remembered all the lonely moments I had experienced. I remembered the dinners alone when Caleb worked late, the times he lay next to me without touching me, the feeling of a woman longing for love and attention, but only receiving endless emptiness in return. And now, in this moment, there was a man right in front of me, someone who brought a warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't know when I moved, but when I opened my eyes, I realized that the distance between me and Jake had shortened. I saw his shoulders tense slightly as if he was waiting for something. A strong wind blew through, making the tent shake slightly. In that moment, I felt like the world was just me and Jake, separated from reality by the thin fabric of the tent. Slowly, I raised my hand, my fingers brushing the fabric of his arm. A fleeting gesture, but one that carried 1,000 meanings. Jake turned his head to look at me, his eyes dark as deep as the ocean. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke, but I knew we both understood that the boundary had been broken. He didn't ask. I didn't need to say. Amidst the sound of the waves and the heavy breathing, I knew I had made a choice. I woke up as the first light of dawn crept through the tent fabric. The first feeling I felt was not happiness nor satisfaction, but an undercurrent of confusion and guilt. I turned my head to look beside me. Jake was still sleeping, his breathing even, his face strangely peaceful. But I didn't feel peaceful. I gently pulled the blanket back and stepped out of the tent. The sand beneath my feet was colder than I expected, as if to remind me that last night had not been a dream. I looked out to see where the sun was slowly rising over the horizon, the soft golden light spreading across the water, heartbreakingly beautiful. But inside me, a storm was brewing. In the distance, I saw Caleb standing alone, his eyes turned to the sea. He didn't turn around, but I had the feeling he knew I was there. I don't know if he noticed anything different, but when he turned to look at me, there was something in his eyes that made my heart clench. He smiled. It was a normal smile, but I couldn't read what it meant. "How do you feel about this trip?" he asked, his voice light and casual. I tried to smile. "Wonderful." But my voice wasn't as sure as before. Caleb looked at me for a long moment as if considering something, then he nodded, turned away, and continued looking out to sea. Everything seemed normal, but I knew something had changed. Jake stepped out of the tent after me, his eyes sweeping over me but not lingering. Not a word, not a confirmation. We had crossed a line from which there was no turning back, and I didn't know where the next wave would take me. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden glow over the sand, everything seemed normal. But I felt like every look, every gesture around me carried hidden messages that I couldn't decipher. Breakfast was quieter than I expected. Ryan stirred his coffee slowly, his gaze wandering out to sea, but I could feel him watching me out of the corner of his eye. Jake sat across from me, taking a bite of toast but not looking directly at me once. And Caleb. He was still smiling, still talking as if nothing was different. But I knew my husband better than anyone. I saw the gaps in his gaze, the moments when the smile on his lips didn't quite reach his eyes. He knew. I wasn't sure how much he knew, but I could feel it in the way he held my gaze longer than usual, in the way he picked up his coffee and didn't drink it right away, just swirled it in his hand. A stronger sea breeze blew through, shaking the glass on the table. I tightened my grip around my coffee cup to steady myself. "Did you sleep well last night?" Caleb spoke suddenly, his voice calm, but I felt like I had been stripped naked in the daylight. Jake paused for a moment as he cut into the egg on his plate, but he quickly continued as if nothing had happened. I smiled, trying to control my voice. "Yeah, the sea breeze made me a little chilly at first, but then I was fine." Caleb raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on his lips. "I thought you would be cold." He put down his coffee cup, his eyes fixed on mine, a slow, calculating look, a look that made me feel like he was waiting for me to confess something. I tightened my hand around my spoon. In that moment, I knew that Caleb was not a man to be trifled with. Ryan suddenly broke the silence. "Any plans today? Maybe a little sailing?" I turned to look at Ryan. Was he deliberately changing the subject, or was I imagining it? Caleb leaned back in his chair, still not taking his eyes off me. "Sail sounds good," he said, his voice slow. "A little change, a little challenge. What do you think?" I felt like I was standing on a thin wire. Jake took a sip of coffee, nodded slightly. "Lead the way." And so we boarded the boat. The sea was more beautiful than usual today, the waves gently lapping against each other in the sunlight, a peaceful dance. But I knew the sea had its secrets, undercurrents that the naked eye couldn't see, waves that seemed calm but could wash everything away in the blink of an eye. I sat at the bow of the boat, my hands gripping the wooden edge, letting the seawater splash against my skin. Jake sat a few feet away, his eyes on the horizon, but I could feel the tension in his every move. Caleb stood behind me, his hands on the wheel, steering the boat with an air of calmness that seemed like he had done this 1,000 times before. But I could sense something different about him, a deliberate calm, a control that I couldn't quite place. "The water is deep here," Caleb said, his voice drowning out the wind. I turned to look at him. His eyes held a strange glint. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Caleb shrugged, a smile playing on his lips. "It's just the truth. There are places where once you fall, there's no turning back." That made me feel like I'd been pushed to the edge of a cliff. Ryan laughed, but his laugh sounded fake. "Come on, we're having fun. Don't take it so seriously." But Caleb didn't take his eyes off me. I turned back, trying to focus on the horizon. But I knew this was more than just a normal trip. I knew I was being tested. I knew Caleb was waiting to see if I'd expose myself. I clenched my fist and took a deep breath. The waves were still gently lapping at the hull, but I felt like I was in the middle of a storm that was about to hit, and I didn't know which of us would be swept away when the storm finally did. The trip took longer than I expected. The sun was high in the sky, its rays reflecting off the water, sparkling like a million shards of a giant mirror. But as beautiful as the view was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hemmed in. Caleb wasn't as talkative as he had been at breakfast. He was focused on steering, but I knew he was watching everything, every glance, every breath, every pause between Jake and me. Ryan was different too. He kept glancing between Caleb and me as if he knew something was going on but wasn't sure what his role was in it. Jake, he was quiet, unlike the previous times when we'd talked freely. He barely said a word. I knew he was trying to avoid drawing attention, but that just made it all the more unusual. I could feel the undercurrent between us growing more dangerous than ever. "Do you guys want to go swimming?" Caleb suddenly said, breaking the tension. I looked at him startled. "Swim?" He nodded, his eyes shining in the sunlight. "Yeah, the water here is clear. Don't you want to try?" I glanced down at the deep blue sea beneath the placid surface. I had no idea what awaited me. "What?" Ryan laughed. "That's a good idea, Caleb. It's hot anyway." Jake looked at Caleb for a long moment, then slowly stood up. "I'm not swimming." His voice was strangely low. Caleb didn't look at Jake, just smiled. "What about you, honey?" I knew this wasn't just an invitation. It was a test. I had a feeling that if I refused, he would know for sure what I was trying to hide. But if I agreed, I would be putting myself in a situation I couldn't control. "Okay." I tried to keep my voice casual. I took off my jacket, leaving my swimsuit underneath. Jake didn't look at me, but I could see his arms clenched into fists. Caleb chuckled. Good. He dove into the water first, the water splashing around him. Ryan followed, laughing as he dove, surfacing again a moment later. I stood at the edge of the boat, taking a deep breath. "Be careful." Jake's voice was soft enough for me to hear. I didn't turn to look at him. I knew if I did, I would reveal what I was trying to hide. I dove in. The water was colder than I expected, but the feeling didn't last long. I floated to the surface, gasping for air. Caleb was nearby, his eyes glued to me. "How's that?" he asked. I nodded. "Great," Caleb laughed. "Sometimes a change is nice, right?" I felt there was more to it than just a swim. Ryan drifted away, unaware of our talk, but Caleb kept his gaze fixed on me. Suddenly he moved closer, so close I could feel the warmth from his movements on my skin. "Do you have something to tell me?" he asked softly, his voice almost frightening. I tensed up. "What do you mean?" Caleb tilted his head, seeming to ponder his response. "It's just that I sense something has shifted." Before I could reply, Jake called out from the boat, "We should head back." "The waves are getting bigger." I turned and noticed the wind had picked up, turning small ripples into larger waves. Caleb watched me for a moment, then chuckled. "Yeah, let's go back." We climbed into the boat, and as I stepped onto the deck, Jake was suddenly right next to me. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, so no one else could hear. I nodded, saying I was fine, but I knew it was a lie. That evening, back at the tent, Caleb still wore his familiar smile. He didn't mention what had happened on the boat, but I could feel the unspoken words hanging between us. As I entered my tent, I heard him close the flap behind me. "Good night," he said, his voice holding something I couldn't quite place. I lay down, trying to sleep, but I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. When I turned, I saw Jake standing in the distance looking at me through the moonlight. We didn't speak, but in that look, I knew we were both caught in this undertow, and no one knew who would be swept away first. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our story. We appreciate your support. Remember, this is just a fictional tale, not based on real events. However, if it were real, what do you think the main character would choose to do? Little did I know that one small moment would change my life forever. It was just a normal Saturday afternoon in Asheville, North Carolina. The sun was setting late, and the breeze rustled through the maple trees in our quiet neighborhood. I still remember the aroma of the black coffee in my hand, the warmth radiating from the cup as I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the window. The house at 243 Maplewood Drive was quieter than usual. My husband Ben was on a night shift at the hospital. Since his promotion to the emergency department, nights without him had become routine. I swirled my coffee, sipping slowly. Upstairs, I heard a faint noise, barely noticeable. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was Ben's stepson, Nathan, fiddling with some electronic device in his room. Nathan was 25, grown and independent, but still living with us while finishing his master's degree at the University of North Carolina. At first, I intended to return to the living room, but something held me back. I put down my coffee and walked up the stairs, each step creaking slightly under my weight. The door to Nathan's room was slightly open, the pale blue light from his computer screen illuminating his face. I was about to knock, but then my eyes stopped involuntarily. Nathan was sitting on the bed, his hands moving hastily, the light from the screen reflecting clearly in his eyes. At first, I thought he was just watching a movie, but when I tilted my head, my perception shifted. A chill ran down my spine, and my heart stopped for a second. I had seen enough. Nathan realized that too. He almost jumped out of bed, frantically pressing the button to turn off the screen, but it was too late. The moment our eyes met, I saw the panic in his eyes, shame, confusion, and something else I dared not name. The room froze for an endless second. I'm sorry, Nathan stammered, his voice small, almost a plea. I felt a strange heat spread through me. I wanted to say something to cut through the awkwardness, but the words stuck in my throat. I turned and left the room before I could process what had just happened. I headed down the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. What the hell did I just see? I whispered to myself, my hands gripping the railing as if it were the only thing keeping me from an invisible abyss. I knew I should have knocked. I should have ignored the small sound. I could have ignored the moment, but I didn't. And now things couldn't go back to the way they were. I sat quietly on the couch in the living room, my hands still clutching my long, cold coffee. As much as I tried to push the moment out of my mind, the image of Nathan's confused eyes lingered. We'd been living together for 4 years, ever since I'd married Ben. Nathan and I had a normal relationship, polite but not overly intimate. He was smart, quiet, a little reserved. I'd always thought he saw me as just a stepmother, nothing more. But tonight, something had changed. I could feel it in the way Nathan looked at me when he came down the stairs a moment later. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the tension between us. He avoided my eyes as he walked by, but I knew he was more aware of my presence than ever. I should have said something to break the tension, a gentle joke, a reassurance. Instead, I stayed silent, staring at the TV without really watching anything. For the next 3 days, things seemed to return to normal. Nathan still went down to the kitchen to make coffee every morning, still buried his head in his laptop with his files, still went to school as usual. But I knew something invisible had changed between us. I started noticing little things. When I stood washing the dishes, I could feel his eyes flickering to me before quickly looking away. When I walked into the living room, Nathan would stiffen for a moment before continuing his work. And once, when I bent down to get something from the cupboard, I saw him hesitate before walking past me, a little closer than usual. I told myself I was imagining things, but then, one evening, as Nathan and I happened to be sitting together watching TV, something became clearer. Normally, we kept a certain distance, but tonight the distance seemed smaller. Unconsciously, I noticed the warmth of his body as he shifted in his chair. Then, as I shifted, my hand brushed against his. Just for a split second, but enough for me to feel the tension radiating through my skin. We both froze in that moment. Nathan looked at me, not with the innocent look he had before, but with a hesitant look, as if he were struggling with himself. I swallowed, turning away as if nothing had happened. But in reality, I knew it had. And I knew from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. I thought that if I ignored what was happening, things would slowly go back to normal. I told myself that it was all just fleeting moments, misunderstandings that I imagined. But then one night I realized that I was wrong. Very wrong. That night, I lay in bed, a feeling of unease washing over me for no apparent reason. I tossed and turned, trying to sleep, but my mind kept wandering in a direction I didn't want to admit. About Nathan. I shouldn't think about him. I shouldn't remember the way he looked at me the night before. I shouldn't let these strange feelings creep into my mind, but the more I tried to forget, the more I felt like something deep inside me was slowly awakening. I needed air. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway, intending to go to the kitchen to get a glass of water. But as I passed Nathan's room, I noticed his door was ajar. Soft light from the desk lamp spilled out, casting faint shadows on the wall. I had no intention of stopping. I should keep going. I should return to my reality. But then my eyes caught the inside of the room and my heart stopped. Nathan was sleeping. He was lying on his side, the covers pulled low, revealing his muscular shoulders and the features of a grown man. The pale yellow light from the desk lamp bathed his skin, creating an image that was both peaceful and dangerous. I knew I should look away immediately, but I didn't. I stood there, eyes glued to the scene before me, feeling a storm raging inside me. I shouldn't be looking. I shouldn't be feeling this way. But somehow, I couldn't stop myself. And then Nathan stirred. He turned, his eyes opening, and for a terrifying second his gaze met mine. I froze. No one said anything. No one moved. We just stood there looking at each other as if the world had stopped. Nathan blinked, then tilted his head slightly. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and sleepy. I swallowed, my breath catching in my throat. I could lie. I could say I was just passing by. But that would be useless. Nathan had seen me. He had seen me standing there looking at him, and he knew there was no logical reason for that. I had broken the barrier. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Nathan looked at me for a long moment, then took a deep breath and sat up. The blanket slid down, and I immediately turned away, trying to hide my embarrassment. But it was too late. Nathan chuckled, a low, meaningful laugh. "You don't have to rush off like that," he said. My heart was pounding. I knew I should leave now. I should end this before it went any further. But I stood there frozen as if a part of me didn't want to leave. And that was my biggest mistake. I should have left right then. I knew I should have walked out of that room, closed the door and pretended this never happened. But instead I stood still, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't. Nathan sat on the bed, his eyes locked on mine. I saw something in them, something curious and challenging. He was no longer the shy young man I had known. Something about him had changed. He knew that I had been there, watching. He knew that I couldn't deny what had just happened, and that gave him a strange confidence, a recklessness I'd never seen before. "Hey," Nathan said slowly, his voice low, a little bit like he was testing me. "Aren't you sleepy?" I swallowed, my heart beating faster than usual. Just going to the kitchen to get some water," I said, my voice not as firm as I'd like. Nathan tilted his head, his eyes never leaving me. He knew I was lying. "Really?" He smiled, a small, dangerous smile. I didn't know what had made me do that, but I turned away, about to walk away. I needed to stop this before it got out of hand, but just as I reached for the doorknob, Nathan's voice rang out behind me. "Have you thought about it?" I froze. I didn't need to ask what he was talking about. I knew, and he knew I knew. My breathing became laboured. I gripped the doorknob but didn't turn it. I should have opened it immediately and left, but instead I stood there, my palms burning as guilt and desire twisted inside me. "Nathan," I said, my voice hoarse. "This isn't—" He finished my sentence, but there was no hesitation in his voice. I turned, finally finding the courage to look at him. "We can't," I whispered, but I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince, Nathan or myself. Nathan just laughed. "But do you want to?" The question broke down all my barriers. I opened my mouth to say something, but I couldn't. I couldn't lie to him, couldn't deny that there was a part of me, no matter how small, that was caught up in this moment. Nathan stood up, walking toward me. I instinctively backed away, my back against the door. He didn't touch me. He just stood so close, close enough for me to feel his warmth, to smell the faint minty scent of his breath. He leaned in, whispering in my ear, "You could say no, but you won't." I shivered, but not from the cold. I knew I should push him away. I knew I should leave now. But instead, I just stood there, letting myself get lost in his warm breath, in the pull I couldn't understand. And then Nathan touched me. It wasn't a quick, rough touch, just the brush of his fingers against my wrist. But it was enough to break any barrier between us. Everything had changed, and I couldn't go back. I don't remember how I left Nathan's room. One moment I was standing there, my body frozen in the conflict between reason and instinct. The next, I was in my room, the door slamming behind me, my back pressed against it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my chest. What just happened? I pressed my hand to my face, breathing hard. The feeling of Nathan's hand on my wrist lingered, as if my skin had memorized it. It was an unnecessary feeling, but I didn't pull away. I didn't say no. I lay awake all night, trying to push away the thoughts that shouldn't have been there. But part of me didn't want to forget that moment. Part of me longed for that feeling again. The next day, I avoided Nathan. I woke up earlier than usual, not waiting for him in the kitchen like I usually did. I spent the day doing odd jobs, cleaning, organizing my closet, anything to keep me busy, to keep me from thinking about him. But by evening, I couldn't avoid him forever. Nathan came home late from the library. When he walked into the kitchen, I was washing dishes. I could feel his presence even without looking. I thought he would act as if nothing had happened. I hoped he would. But when I turned around, Nathan was looking at me straight on, not avoiding the tension between us. It was as thick as a fog. "You're avoiding me," he said. I tightened my grip on the washcloth. "No, you're just busy." Nathan smiled faintly, a disbelieving smile. "You've never been so busy that you haven't had time to sit down and have a cup of coffee." I didn't know what to say. He was right. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Nathan, about yesterday." "No need to explain," he interrupted. "I understand." I looked at him. "Understand what?" He leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "You're scared." I blinked. "Scared?" Nathan nodded. "Not afraid because it happened, but afraid because you wanted it to happen." I felt myself choke up. I could deny it. I should deny it, but I couldn't lie to myself. The silence stretched between us, only the ticking of the clock on the wall echoing in the tense air. I shook my head, trying to shake off the spell that was pulling me down. "Nathan, we can't go on like this." He smiled, but his eyes were no longer innocent. "You said we can't, but you didn't say you don't want to." I froze. He stepped closer to me and I should have backed away, but I didn't. Nathan whispered my name, raising his hand, his fingers brushing my arm. A light touch, but enough to send shivers down my spine. "You can push me away now," he said, his voice low, almost a challenge. "Just say the word, and I'll stop." I should have. I should have pushed him away, but I didn't. I let him come closer as the distance between us closed. I knew. I felt that there was no turning back. We had gone too far, and soon Ben would know.